He has called on the old woman every single day for a month, the matron said behind her fan, and no soul in England can imagine why a man like that would trouble himself. Perhaps he loves her, said her companion. Sherborne? Love? My dear, they call him the coldest stone in the kingdom, and they are being kind. He has never loved anything but his own consequence. No, there is a reason he goes to that ruined house every day, and it is not fondness for a dying grandmother, mark me. The man they spoke of stood not 10 feet from them, close enough to have heard every word, and he did not so much as turn his head. He was very tall and very still, storm gray of eye, unsmiling, and the whole assembly at Fenwick House had arranged itself around that stillness, as water arranges itself around a stone in a stream, and Eleanor Whitlock, seated against the wall where the paid companions and the poor relations were always seated, kept her eyes upon her needle and drew her thread through the linen and did not look up. But Sherborne was looking, not at his grandmother, who dozed in her chair with her cane across her knees. He was watching a pair of ungloved hands move a needle in and out of a square of white cloth, and he could not have said aloud why the sight held him, only that it did, and had held him now for the better part of a month, and that he had begun, without admitting it even to himself, to arrange his whole day around the chance of it. He had no name for the thing yet. He knew only what it cost him to leave that drawing room each evening, and that the cost was climbing. They say he means to choose a bride at last, the matron went on, the whole season laid out for him like a supper table. And there he sits, wasting his afternoons in a dead man's parlor with a decrepit grandmother and her hired mouse. Eleanor's needle did not falter. She had been called worse, and by finer people, and she had learned young that the surest dignity was the kind that needed no witness to notice it. Her wages went every quarter to a schoolmistress in Bath, where a girl of 14 with her mother's chin was learning French and the use of the globes. And while that continued, she could be a mouse in a dozen drawing rooms and mind it not at all. She finished the row, knotted the thread, and bit it clean. Across the room, the man they were dissecting finally moved. He crossed to his grandmother, bent, and murmured that the hour grew late. The carriage is called. Madam, shall we? Already? The old woman woke with the theatrical suddenness of a person who had not truly slept. You are a great dull creature, boy. There is another hour of gossip in this room, and you would deny an old woman her only pleasure. You may gossip in the carriage. It is not the same, and you know it. One wants an audience for gossip. But she let herself be helped up, and it was only then, as the two of them made their slow way toward the door, that his glance passed over the wall of forgotten women and stopped, for the length of a single held breath, upon the one with the needle. Eleanor felt it as one feels a draught from an opened door. She looked up before she could stop herself. His eyes were exactly as gray and as cold as they were reputed to be, and for that one breath they were not cold at all. And then he had looked away. And the matron was murmuring farewells, and the door was closing, and Eleanor sat very still with her empty needle in her fingers and told herself she had dreamed the whole small moment. She had not dreamed it. But it would be a long while yet before she let herself believe so. Fernley Hall, the dower house of the Dowager Duchess, stood at the end of a lime avenue 3 miles from the market town, and in the 2 years Eleanor had lived in it, she had learned it the way a physician learns a patient. She knew which stairs complained and which stayed silent. She knew the east chimney smoked when the wind came off the fens. She knew the whole place measured its own decline in subtractions. A footman not replaced, a wing shut up. The silver sold quietly to a dealer in the county town, and the gaps in the cabinet turned to face the wall. She knew, too, that her mistress was nowhere near so frail as she pretended. "Read to me, child," the old woman commanded that first evening after the assembly, settling into her chair by the fire, with a rug across her knees she did not need. "My eyes are quite gone. It is a great affliction to be old, Eleanor. Pray you never learn it. Your Grace read the whole of the Bath newspaper aloud to me this very morning," Eleanor said, "including the shipping notices, which you found dull, and an advertisement for a cure for baldness, which you found so funny you wept. I have good mornings and bad evenings. Your Grace has, I have observed, precisely whatever kind of eyes the moment requires." The old woman gave a bark of laughter and thumped her cane. "Impertinent girl. I will not be managed. Read." So Eleanor read. She had a low, unhurried voice, and she read well, and her mistress closed both eyes and appeared to listen, and did not listen in the least, but watched her companion through her lashes with the sharp attention of a general surveying a field before a battle. The Dowager Duchess had buried a husband and 2 sons. She had 1 grandson left in all the world, and he was 35, unwed. And colder every year, wrapped so tightly in his grief and his consequence that she had begun to fear he would die a stranger to his own heart. She had tried every remedy. She had thrown beauties at him, and heiresses at him, and watched him bow over their hands with a courtesy so perfect it could not be told apart from contempt. Then, this last winter, she had turned her ankle upon the ice of her own steps, and her grandson had come, grim and dutiful, to sit with her while it mended. And on the 3rd evening she had watched him forget entirely what he was reading aloud, in the middle of a sentence, because Eleanor had come in with the tea tray, and he had stopped to watch her set it down. The Dowager had said not a word. But she had begun, that very night, to plan. "You will tell me," she said now as Eleanor turned a page, "why my grandson comes here every day. To see your Grace, I imagine. He never came before. Twice a year, at Christmas and on my birthday, he came and stood by the mantel like a fire iron and left as soon as he decently could. Now he comes at 4 and stays until dark." She opened one eye. "You are not a stupid girl. Do not begin now. I am sure I could not say why a duke does anything, your Grace. No." The eye closed again, well satisfied. "I am sure you could not. Read on, and mind the long words. He came the next day at 4, exactly as she had said he would." Eleanor was in the conservatory when the carriage turned in at the gates, cutting the last of the season's roses. Because the old woman liked something living on the table even when the garden was giving up for the year. She heard the wheels on the gravel, the horses blowing, the door, and then, nearer than she had looked for, a footstep. She turned with the shears in her hand, and Sherborne was standing in the conservatory doorway, watching her. "Your Grace." She curtsied. "The Dowager Duchess is in the drawing room. I will tell her you have come. She knows I have come. She sent me to find you. She sent your Grace to the conservatory? She says the light in the drawing room is bad for reading, and that we are to sit in the small parlor, and that you are to bring the roses." He did not move out of the doorway. She was very particular about the roses. "Of course, your Grace." Still he did not move. He was looking at the shears in her hand, and at the flowers laid in the crook of her arm, and something worked behind the gray of his eyes that she could not read, and did not dare to try. "You cut them short," he said at last. "Your Grace?" "The roses. My mother cut them long, on great tall stems, so they towered in the vases, and one could not see across the table. My grandmother complained of it for 30 years. A muscle moved at the corner of his mouth that in another man might have been the start of a smile. You cut them short. So that one can see across the table, Eleanor said. Your Grace. He looked at her then, fully, as he had for that one breath at the assembly, except that now there was no crowd to make him look away, and the moment stretched. 1 second. 2. And she felt the blood come up in her face and was angry at it, and dropped her eyes to the flowers. Yes, he said quietly, so that a man may look across at whoever sits opposite him. He stood aside to let her pass. In the narrow doorway the air between them was very small and very warm, and his hand rose a little, as though he would take the roses from her, or steady her elbow, or do some other perfectly ordinary courteous thing, and then it did not, and fell back to his side, and she went through into the passage, with her heart going like a hare's, and told herself, once again, that nothing whatever had passed. She was becoming, she thought crossly, a great imaginer of things. The evening settled into a shape. At 4 he came. At 4:30 the tea came, and the old woman drank 2 cups, and complained of both. At 5 the reading began, and it was Sherborne who read now, for his grandmother had declared her eyes finished and her grandson's voice tolerable. You will read to us, boy, she had announced. My eyes cannot bear it, and Eleanor's throat wants resting. You have a passable voice when you trouble to use it. Sit there. No. There, where the light falls, begin. So he sat in the wing chair with the book, and Eleanor sat opposite with her work, and the dowager sat enthroned between them like a spider in the midst of a web she had spun herself and was very pleased with. He read a novel about a foundling and a lost fortune, and his grandmother pronounced it trash and demanded the next chapter every night without fail. And 2 or 3 times each evening, the reading stopped. It happened always in the same fashion. He would be going along, steady and low, and then Eleanor would do some small thing, rethread her needle, tuck a loose strand behind her ear, lean to mend the fire, and the sentence would simply stop. In the middle, the next word hanging in the air. There would be a silence of 1 beat, 2, while the fire ticked and the old woman's knitting needles clicked on without pause, and then he would find his place and read on as though nothing at all had occurred. Eleanor noticed it the 3rd evening. By the 5th she had begun, against her will, to listen for it. By the 2nd week she had understood exactly what it was, and had resolved to give it no name and no encouragement whatever, because a companion who let herself believe a duke's voice caught on her account was a companion halfway to ruin. Her mistress noticed everything, and gave it every encouragement in the world. Eleanor, my shawl. I have left it in the conservatory. I will send Betsy, your Grace. Betsy is deaf as a post, and slow as Christmas. Boy, go with her. The passages are dark, and she will break her neck, and then where should I be? With a broken companion, and no one to read me trash. And so Eleanor found herself walking the long, cold conservatory passage with Sherborne at her shoulder, the 2 of them silent, the shawl a pretext they both understood, and neither named. Your grandmother, Eleanor said once, in the dark of that passage, greatly daring, is not nearly so frail as she wishes to appear. She felt rather than saw him go still. No, he said. She is not. Then why does she pretend it? You would have to ask her. I have stopped asking her things. A pause. She lies to me with such enjoyment that it seems a cruelty to deny her the pleasure. Eleanor laughed before she had thought better of it. A real laugh, surprised out of her, and heard him draw a short breath in the dark, as though the sound had struck him somewhere he was not defended. You should do that more often, he said, very low. Fetch shawls? Your Grace? Laugh. You do it as though you had only just remembered how. Neither of them said anything more. They found the shawl. They walked back. And Eleanor lay awake half that night with her hands pressed flat on the coverlet, telling herself, over and over, that she had dreamed up the whole of it out of loneliness. The dowager, having decided upon a thing, was not a woman to let it lie. Boy, she announced the next evening, before Sherborne had so much as opened the book, you read too fast. You gallop through the tender parts as though they were a bill of fare. Eleanor, tell him he reads too fast. His Grace reads very well, Eleanor said, not looking up from her work. That is not what I asked. I asked you to tell him he reads too fast. I could not contradict your Grace before your own grandson. It would undermine your authority in the household. Do you hear that, boy? She will not tell you to your face, but she agrees with me entirely. Now, where were we in the trash? The foundling, Sherborne said dryly, was about to discover his true parentage in a locked drawer, which the author has been threatening for 11 chapters, and I begin to fear will never arrive. It will arrive, said the old woman. These things always arrive. The only question is whether the girl he loves will believe him when it does, or whether she plays the great fool and listens to gossip instead of to her own 2 eyes. She will play the fool, Sherborne said. They generally do, in these books. It is required of them. She will not, Eleanor said. Both of them looked at her. She had spoken before she quite meant to, and now, having spoken, she went on, her needle steady. She will not be a fool, your Grace, because the author has been at pains to show us she is sensible. A sensible woman does not throw away the evidence of her own eyes because a room full of people tells her to. She weighs the room against her eyes, and if her eyes are the better witness, she keeps them and lets the room say what it likes. She drew her thread through. It is only in poor books that clever women turn stupid at the crisis to lengthen the story. In a good book she stays exactly as clever as she was on the first page, and it is her cleverness that saves her. That is the whole pleasure of it. There was a small silence. Well, said the dowager, with vast satisfaction, settling back into her chair. There is my answer, boy. She will not be a fool. Miss Whitlock has ruled upon it, and I find I agree with every word. Read on, and mind you do not gallop the next part. It is the part I like. Sherborne did not read on at once. He sat with the book open on his knee and looked at the gray woman opposite him with the needle going in and out. And Eleanor felt the look and did not raise her eyes to it, and the coals settled softly in the grate. No, he said at last, quietly, to the book, or to the room, or to her. I do not think she will be a fool either. I begin to think I have been reading the wrong sort of woman my whole life, and mistaking the type for the whole. What was that, boy? Speak up, I am old and deaf. I said, Sherborne said, in a perfectly even voice, turning a page, that the chapter is a long one, madam, and you should tell me at once if you wish to be spared any of it. I will be spared none of it. That is the difference between us. You would be spared everything, boy, and it has made you very dull. Read, and he read, and did not gallop, and twice in the length of that chapter the sentence stopped short and hung in the air a beat, 2, while the grate murmured and the dowager's needles clicked without pause, and Eleanor bent close over her work and did not, would not, let herself listen for it. And listened for it all the same. When Sherborne had gone that night, the dowager did not ring for her maid at once. She sat on, watching Eleanor put the branch of candles out one by one, and there was a look upon her face that Eleanor had learned to be wary of. "Sit down a moment, child. I want to look at you." "It is late, Your Grace. You will be tired in the morning." "I am always tired in the morning, and it has never yet killed me." "Sit." Eleanor sat. "Do you know," the dowager said, "what my grandson was before his father died? He was 25, and he laughed. I do not suppose you would credit it to look at him. He laughed, and he rode too fast, and he was in love twice a year, and he was the most tiresome and delightful creature in 3 counties. She folded her hands. "And then his father died badly, in debt and in disgrace. And half the county that had eaten at our table would not bow to us in the street, and my grandson looked at that, and decided that to be safe he must want nothing, and feel nothing, and let no living soul come close enough to do him harm. And he has been very safe ever since, and very cold, and I have watched it, and grieved it, and been able to do not one thing about it, for 10 long years. Why do you tell me this, Your Grace?" "Because you are not a fool, whatever you pretend, and I am too old to talk in circles." The black eyes fixed on her. "He comes here every day, Eleanor. He forgets his sentences. Last week he asked me, most carelessly, whether you were happy in your situation, and whether you were used well, and whether you had thought of leaving it. My grandson has not troubled to wonder whether anyone was happy in 10 years. Now, I will ask you a plain question, and you will give me a plain answer. Do you understand what is happening in this house?" Eleanor was silent a long moment. "I understand," she said at last, very low, "that I am a paid companion with £12 a year and a sister at school, and that whatever is or is not happening in this house, it is no business a woman in my place is permitted to understand. So I have decided not to. It is safer." "Safer," the old woman said the word as though it tasted of ash. "There is that word again. He taught it to you, I suppose, without either of you noticing. You are as bad as he is." She reached out, unexpectedly, and took Eleanor's hand in her dry old fingers and held it. "Listen to me, child, for I shall not say it twice, and I shall deny I ever said it at all. Safe is what you are when you are dead. I have been safe these 20 years since my husband went, and I would trade every safe hour of it for one more evening of being frightened half out of my wits by a man who loved me. Do not be safe. Whatever else you are, in this house or out of it, do not be safe. Now give me your arm up the stairs, and if you tell a soul I wept, I shall turn you off without a character." "Your Grace has not wept." "No," the dowager agreed, rising heavily on her arm. "I have not. See that you remember it. She had been 2 years in the house before she truly looked at the jewels. It was the dowager's whim, one wet afternoon when no reading was to be had and Sherborne had gone up to town on business, that they should take out the whole of the Sherborne collection and clean it. Because it had not been touched since the old Duke died, and that was a disgrace, and idle hands were the devil's business besides. So they spread a green baize cloth on the parlor table, and Eleanor fetched the cases up from the strong closet one after another, and laid them out. Emeralds the old Duke had given his wife on their wedding, a rope of pearls, rings enough for a bishop. And at the heart of it all, in its own worn velvet case, the great starburst brooch that every Duchess of the line, back 4 generations and more, had worn at the breast, a spray of brilliance set in silver, radiating from a central stone the size of a thrush's egg, so that it threw light like a struck flint. "My wedding gift," the dowager murmured, watching Eleanor lift it. 60 years ago come Michaelmas. He clasped it on me himself, and his hands shook, the great fool, and he was a duke of 40 and afraid of a girl of 19. She was quiet a moment. "Clean it well, child. It goes to whatever poor creature my grandson finally marries, if ever he does, and I should like it to shine when it does. Not that he will. He will die a bachelor out of sheer contrariness, to spite me." Eleanor took the brooch to the window and worked at it with the soft cloth and the little brush, and it was as she turned it in the gray afternoon light that she saw the thing that would, in the end, save her life. One of the stones was wrong. She could not at first have said how she knew. She was a parson's daughter. She had never owned a brilliant and never would. But her father had loved one true thing above his books and his sermons, and that was honest craft, and he had taught her to see how a joint was cut, how a hem was turned, how a thing well made differed from a thing made merely to pass. And this one stone, among all the rest, did not sit right in the light. The brilliance around it took the gray window glow and broke it into hard little rainbows and threw it back cold. This one gathered the light and held it and gave it back soft and yellowish, like a thing warmed from within. Eleanor breathed upon it as one breathes upon a window pane. The fog sat on the stone a moment, a whole slow moment, and then cleared. She breathed upon the great central brilliant beside it. That fog vanished before her breath was even finished, so fast she might have doubted her own eyes. She stood very still at the window with the brooch in her hands, and she heard her father's voice as clearly as though he stood at her shoulder. A false stone warms in the hand, he had told her once, mending a lady's paste buckle that had been sold to the lady as brilliance, and clouds under the breath, and is slow to clear, for it is only glass. And glass is a warm and idle thing that will flatter any hand that holds it. But a true diamond stays cold whatever you do to it, and takes your breath and gives it back at once, for a diamond is the coldest thing that is not ice, and it keeps its own counsel. "Is anything the matter, child?" The old woman called from the fire. "You have gone very quiet over there." Eleanor looked at the stone that warmed under her breath, sitting proud in the most famous brooch in the county, and then she raised her glance to her mistress, a woman who had buried a husband and 2 sons, and had 1 grandson left, and trusted almost nobody in the wide world. "No, Your Grace," she said, surprised at how steady her own voice came. "I was only thinking how beautifully it is made." She cleaned the brooch, and laid it back in its velvet, and closed the lid. That night she did not sleep, for she had grasped a second thing, colder than the first. A false stone at the heart of the family brooch had not grown there of itself. Some hand had put it there, a hand with a key to the strong closet, or the trust of one who held such a key, and had taken the true diamond and left glass in its place, and had done it so cleverly that a house in slow decline, selling its silver and turning its cabinets to the wall, had never once noticed the theft of a fortune under its own roof. How much, she wondered, has gone out this way? And being her father's daughter, she resolved to find the truth entire before she breathed one word of accusation aloud, for a charge without proof was only slander, and slander was the single weapon a woman in her place could never afford to be caught holding. She wrote a letter the next morning, short and careful, addressed to Mr. Pettigrew, jeweler of the Strand, who the household book said had cleaned and reset the family's stones for 40 years. She asked only when he had last had the starburst in his hands, and whether he kept a record of the stones by weight and by flaw, as the best men in the trade were said to do. She sealed it, gave it to the carrier with her own hand, and told no one. Not her mistress. Not the grandson. Especially not the grandson. He came back from town on a Thursday, gray with the cold and the long road, and came straight to the small parlor without changing, which was not like him, and stood in the doorway looking for something, and found it, and only then let his shoulders come down from around his ears. "Your Grace has ridden hard," Eleanor said, rising. "The roads are foul." "Is my grandmother asleep this half hour?" Truly asleep, I think this time, and not merely spying with her eyes shut. That surprised a low sound out of him that was very nearly a laugh. "You have found her out, then, within a week of coming, Your Grace. She is the least frail person in England, and she knows that I know it, and we have agreed, without ever once saying so, to go on pretending. Because it amuses her, and it costs me nothing." Eleanor hesitated. "There is tea still hot, if Your Grace would take it. You look perished." "Yes," he said. "Thank you. Yes." She poured. He watched her pour, and when she brought the cup he did not take it at once but stood a moment with his cold hands and her warm ones, and the cup between them and the steam rising up between their two faces. And it was very quiet in the parlor, with the old woman breathing slow and the fire settling, and Eleanor thought, with a clarity that frightened her, if I rose up on my toes, I could kiss him, and he would let me, and everything I have would be gone in a moment and never come back to me. She gave him the cup. He took it. She stepped back to a proper distance and folded her own hands instead, the thumb pressed flat, so he should not see what it had cost. "You are cold, Your Grace," she said. "Sit by the fire." "I am always cold. It is a family failing. My grandmother says I was born with frost on me and have been thawing very slowly ever since, at the rate of about 1 degree a decade." He sat and drank and looked into the flames, and then his gaze came back to her where she had taken up her work. "It is warmer in this house than it used to be. I did not notice it until just now, coming in from the road. When did that happen?" "I could not say, Your Grace." "You could. You say you could not, which is a different thing entirely, and I have begun to notice you do it whenever I ask you something you would rather not answer. Perhaps Your Grace asks a great many things a companion would rather not answer. Perhaps I do." He almost smiled. "Humor me. When did the house grow warm?" "When your grandmother let me open the shutters," Eleanor said. "That is all it was, Your Grace. A house that has been kept dark to save candles grows cold in the habit of it. One opens the shutters and lights the fires that were laid and never lit, and learns which chair the mistress likes and which draught she hates, and the warmth was there all along, only waiting to be let at. There is no great mystery in it. It is only attention. Anyone might do it who troubled to look." "No," Sherborne said slowly. "I do not think anyone might. I think most people would walk through cold rooms their whole lives and call it the weather." He turned the cup in his hands. "The fires are built differently now. There are candles in the passages that stood dark all my boyhood. The great table is shorter." He turned the cup in his hands. "The servants say your name to one another now. Did you know it? I heard the boy in the yard call you Miss Eleanor, as though it were a fine thing to be. When I was a child in this house, the servants said nobody's name at all. They crept about it like mice in a church." "A house is only rooms, Your Grace," Eleanor said, her eyes on her work, "until somebody lives in it as though they mean to stay." "Do you?" he said. "Mean to stay?" And there it was, the question beneath the question, laid on the table between them at last. She did not dare pick it up. She did not dare leave it lying there either. "I mean to be useful to your grandmother for as long as she wishes it," she said carefully. "My situation does not allow me to make plans much beyond that. Your Grace understands. "I begin," he said, "to understand a great many things I have taken pains my whole life to avoid looking at." And he set down the cup, and rose, and stood over her a moment, too near. Near enough that she had to tip her head back to meet his eyes, and neither of them moved, and the fire ticked. 1, 2, 3. And then the old woman stirred and coughed and demanded to know querulously whether there was any tea left in the pot, and the spell broke, and Eleanor got up to see to her, with her heart slamming and her face aflame, and the certain knowledge, now, past all pretending, that not one moment of it had been in her own head. There was a cousin. Eleanor had heard of Mr. Julian Vane long before she ever saw him. The servants spoke of him as they spoke of bad weather, an inconvenience that arrived, made everything harder, and left debts behind it. He was cousin to the Duke on the mother's side, and until such time as the grim Duke should trouble himself to marry and get an heir, Vane stood heir presumptive to the whole estate, and he lived exactly as a man lives who is quite certain of a fortune he does not yet hold. He came to Fernley on a bright morning 3 weeks before the birthday, driving a curricle he plainly could not afford, and came, he said, to pay his respects to his dear great-aunt, and stayed to luncheon, and was charming. That was the thing Eleanor had not looked for. He was charming. A handsome, easy, laughing man of perhaps 30, fair where his cousin was dark, warm where his cousin was cold, with a knack of making a room feel that a party had only just begun. He kissed the old woman's hand, and called her the belle of 3 counties, and made her cackle. He was generous to the servants with a coin. And he found Eleanor, the companion in her dove gray, inside the first 10 minutes, and was kind to her too, in a manner that made her skin creep for reasons she could not at first name. "And this is Miss Whitlock," the dowager announced, "who reads to me and manages me, and is a great deal cleverer than she lets on, so you had best mind your tongue with her, Julian. She misses nothing." "Then she is cleverer than the rest of us," Vane said, bowing over Eleanor's hand a fraction too long, "for the rest of us let on a very great deal and have nothing behind it. Miss Whitlock, I am your servant. Any woman who manages my great-aunt is a field marshal, and I salute her colors." He smiled at her. It was a very good smile. She curtsied, murmured something proper, and thought, "He is looking at me as a man looks at a lock he means to pick." She did not yet know what she possessed that he wanted. She knew only, with her father's instinct for the joint that will not hold, that Julian Vane was a thing made to pass, and that somewhere beneath the good smile there was glass. He stayed the day, and in the afternoon, while the dowager napped and the Duke had not yet come, Eleanor came quietly into the drawing-room to fetch a work-basket she had left, and found Vane standing at the cabinet where the smaller jewel cases were kept for the season, with one of them open in his hands. He did not startle. That was the worst of it. "My great-aunt's baubles," he said, turning quite easily, setting the case down with a click. "I was admiring them. There is more money in this cabinet than in half of London, Miss Whitlock, and it sits here in a country house, guarded by an old woman and a girl. It hardly seems safe, does it?" "The house is very quiet, sir," Eleanor said. "Nothing is disturbed here." "No." He looked at her, and for one instant the charm thinned like fog under a breath, and she saw the cold thing behind it, taking her measure. "Nothing is disturbed here. Let us hope it remains so." Then the smile came back, whole and warm, and he bowed and went out to walk in the garden, and Eleanor stood looking at the closed cabinet with her heart beating hard, and thought, "He knows. He knows I have seen something." She could not tell how, But he knew. She thought of the letter to Mr. Pettigrew, gone to town in the carrier's bag, and for the first time she was afraid of it. Sherborne came at 4 and found her pale and knew at once that something was wrong, which alarmed her more than anything Vane had done, that this granite man had learned her face so well he could read weather in it. "What has happened?" he said. "Not a question. Nothing, Your Grace. Your cousin dined here today. He is gone." Something dark and quick crossed his face at the name. Vane was here. He came to pay his respects to your grandmother. He was very charming. He is always very charming when he wants money, which is always. He was quiet a moment. "Did he speak to you?" "A little." "About what?" Eleanor hesitated. She had resolved to tell no one until she had her proof, and she held to it, but she found she could not lie to him outright. "He admired the jewels," she said carefully. "He said it hardly seemed safe, so much wealth in a quiet house guarded by an old woman and a girl." Sherborne went very still. "He said that?" "Those words?" "Yes, Your Grace." He turned and walked to the window and stood with his back to her a long time, and when he spoke it was in a voice she had not heard from him, low and hard and carefully level, a man holding something down by main strength. "My cousin," he said, "is in debt to a degree that would frighten you, and I will not name the sum. He owes money at every table in town, and to men who do not forgive it. For a year I have been buying up his notes, his gaming debts, his tailor's bills, the whole shameful heap, quietly, through my man of business, so that when the crash comes, and come it will, the scandal falls on me to manage and not upon my grandmother, who loves the wretched creature and would grieve herself into the grave over him." He turned. "I have told no one this. I am telling you." "Why?" The word escaped her before she had willed it. "Because I find I cannot seem to keep a single thing from you, and it is a most inconvenient discovery. I have spent my whole life keeping things from everyone, and I was very good at it, and I come into this house and sit in that chair and read a foolish novel about a foundling, and I find I want to hand you everything I have ever kept and let you sort it, as you sort my grandmother's letters." He said it evenly, almost coldly, as though reporting a defeat. "I do not know what to do about it. I am telling you that too." Eleanor stood with her work-basket in her 2 hands and could not find a word. "You need not answer," he went on. "You are in my grandmother's pay, and I am master of the house that pays you, and there is nothing you could say to me that would not be extorted by that arrangement, and I know it, and I despise it, and I cannot stop myself. So I will read now, and you will sit, and we will speak no more of it. But I wanted it said aloud once. That is all." And he sat, and opened the book, and read to the empty room in his low, even voice until the old woman woke, and Eleanor sat opposite with her work untouched in her lap, and understood that the ground had shifted entirely beneath her, and that there was no shifting it back. The candle night came a week before the ball. The dowager had gone up early, genuinely tired for once, and Eleanor had stayed to bank the parlor fire and put out the lights before following. Sherborne had stayed too, on some pretext of a letter to finish, and they were alone in the dying-down room with a single branch of candles between them on the writing table, and neither of them was doing anything at all. "You are not writing your letter," Eleanor observed. "No, and I am not going up to bed." "No," he agreed. "You are not. We are a great pair of frauds, Your Grace." "We are," he said. "I have been a fraud for 35 years. You have been one for perhaps a fortnight. I am better at it, but you are catching up quickly." She laughed, and one of the candles guttered as if in answer, caught a draught, flared, and began to drown itself in its own wax, sinking toward dark, and they both reached to save it at once, she from her side, and he from his. And their hands met upon the cold brass of the candlestick, his closing over hers. He did not let go. She did not draw away. The flame steadied. It stood up straight and burned clear again, and threw its gold up over their two joined hands and their two faces bent close above the little light. And Sherborne looked at her across it with everything he had spent a lifetime learning to hide standing plain and undefended in his eyes. 1 second. 2. 3. Eleanor, he said. Only that. Her name, without the miss, without the wall of it, the first time he had ever spoken it so, and it undid her more thoroughly than any speech could have done. Your Grace, she managed. Gabriel, he said. My name is Gabriel. No one has used it in years. My grandmother calls me Boy, and the world calls me Sherborne, and I had half forgotten I owned another. I should like to hear you use it. Once, only the once, if you like, and then never again if you think it wrong of me to ask. And Eleanor, with his hand warm over hers and the whole of her careful, sensible life balanced upon a candle flame, opened her mouth to be sensible, and heard herself say instead, very softly, Gabriel. He shut his eyes as though the sound had hurt him somewhere old. Then he opened them, and lifted her hand off the candlestick, and held it a moment longer between both of his, and set it gently down upon the table. Thank you, he said, and his voice was not quite steady. That was, thank you. Good night, Eleanor. Take a light. The passages are dark. And he was gone, and she sat alone with the rescued candle burning between her hands, and did not pretend to herself that it had been nothing, for she was long past that now, and pressed her saved hand against her own cheek where his warmth still lived, and let herself, for one single reckless minute, believe. Then she blew out the candle, and took up another, and went to bed. And in the morning she was sensible again, but Mr. Pettigrew's answer had come, and everything was about to break. The letter was long, in the careful hand of a careful old tradesman, and it said in substance 3 things. It said Mr. Pettigrew had indeed kept the family stones by weight and by flaw for 40 years, as the best men did, and had a ledger of them running back to the old Duke's grandfather. It said the great starburst had last been in his hands 2 years since, before Miss Whitlock's time, and had then been whole and true in every stone, and that he would stake his name upon it. And in the last paragraph, in the tone of a man choosing his words with the greatest care, it said that within the last 12-month a gentleman had come to him not with the family stones to clean, but with loose brilliants to sell, fine old stones, cut in an old fashion, of a size and a water he had thought he recognized. Though the gentleman gave a false name, and Pettigrew had had neither proof nor right to refuse an honest sale. He had bought 3 of them, could describe them, had entered them by weight in his book, and if Miss Whitlock had reason to ask what she seemed to be asking, he was, as an honest man, entirely at her service, and would come himself to any place she named, and bring the book. She read it twice by the gray window, and then folded it small and put it inside her stays, against her heart, where no hand would find it, and went down to breakfast with her face composed, and thought clearly and coldly, I have him. Whoever he is, I have him now. I want only the day, the place, and the room. She did not wait long for the 3 of them. The birthday was in 6 days, the whole county coming, and Julian Vane, she would learn, had fixed on the very same night for a purpose of his own. She wrote once more that morning, to Pettigrew, naming the day of the ball, and Fernley Hall, and begging him to come and bring his book, and wait quietly in the steward's room until sent for. She carried it to the carrier herself, as before. She believed she had been careful. She had been careful. But Vane kept a man in the carrier's office who was glad of a shilling, and by that evening Vane knew the parson's mouse had written twice to a jeweler in the Strand, and Vane, who was many things but not a fool, understood at once and entirely that his year of quiet thieving was about to come to light, and that he had exactly 6 days to see that when the diamonds were spoken of, the finger pointed anywhere on earth but at himself. He was a gambler. He knew how to play a losing hand. You did not fold. You raised, hard and fast, and made the other man afraid to call. So he sat down that same night, by his own guttering candle, and began, very carefully, to practice a woman's hand. The house filled with the birthday. For a week Fernley shook off its genteel poverty like a dog shaking off water. The shut-up wing was opened and aired. Extra servants came from the county town. The great table that had not seated more than 3 in years was polished and laid its full 24. The chandeliers came down lozenge by lozenge to be washed in vinegar and hung again blazing, and the whole avenue of limes was hung with lamps. 90 guests, the old woman crowed, ordering footmen about and countermanding the cook and changing her mind about the flowers 4 separate times. 90, child, in a house they had all written off for dead. They come to gawk at the ruin, and I shall give them a blaze that puts their eyes out. My grandson will be here. He is bringing half of London. There is talk he means to announce his choice of bride at last, though he tells me nothing. The wretch. He never does. She shot Eleanor a look sharp as a needle. You will wear the good gray silk. Not the dove. The good silk. The one I gave you at Easter that you have never once put on. And you will do something with your hair, and you will not hide with the dowagers. This once, Eleanor, you will not hide. Your grace, it is not my place. Your place is where I put you. And tonight I put you where the light is. Now go and see about the wax for the ballroom floor. And if you see that graceless creature Vane, send him to me. He arrived an hour since, and has not paid his respects. Eleanor found Vane in the ballroom, standing alone upon the blazing empty floor beneath the washed chandeliers, smiling at nothing. When she came in with her list, he turned the smile upon her, whole and warm and terrible. Miss Whitlock, the field marshal herself. Come to marshal the troops? Your great aunt asks for you, sir. You have not paid your respects. I shall. He strolled toward her across the shining floor. You have been busy. The whole house transformed, and such a very great deal of correspondence too, I hear. Letters flying off to town by every carrier. A companion's work is never done. He was near now, and his voice dropped, pleasant as ever, and the words came out soft and clear and unmistakable. Do you know? I have always found it is the quiet ones who bear the most watching. The loud ones tell you everything. But a quiet gray woman who writes letters and says nothing, she is the one to keep an eye upon. I have my eye on you, Miss Whitlock. I have had it there some weeks. I should hate for anything to happen to you. Eleanor looked up at him and did not step back. You spend a great deal of breath, sir, she said, on a woman you keep telling me is beneath your notice. Do I? A hired mouse who reads to your great aunt and sorts her letters. Hardly worth the watching, one would think. And yet here you are, on the night of a great ball, standing alone in an empty room, warning her. She let that sit a moment. A man only warns what he is afraid of, Mr. Vane. I had not thought I was worth your fear. Something flickered behind the charm, quick and ugly, and was smoothed over at once. You mistake concern for fear, Miss Whitlock. It is a common error in clever women. It makes them careless. Then I shall try to be neither clever nor careless, Eleanor said, and merely useful, as I am paid to be. Your great aunt is waiting. I am sure I cannot think what else you would have of me, sir, but I will tell her. You are come. She turned and walked off the blazing floor with the list clutched tight, her spine straight, and her knees like water. And behind her Julian Vane stopped smiling, and thought about the 6 days he had had, and the letter he had forged, and the brooch, and decided that tonight he would raise the stakes so high that no one alive would dare to call. She dressed for the ball in the good gray silk, her sister's letter propped against the glass for courage, 3 lines from Bath in a schoolgirl's careful hand about French verbs and a kind teacher and a new pair of boots, all of it paid for by 2 years of downcast eyes, all of it hers to protect. She looked at herself in the glass and hardly knew the woman there. The good silk caught the candlelight like water. Her dark hair was up, with the loose strands the maid had insisted on lit gold at her temples. She looked, she made herself think the word. Alone in the small cold room, she looked like a woman who might be chosen. Then she folded the thought up small and put it away, for hope was the single luxury a woman in her place truly could not afford, and went down to do her work. The ball was ablaze. 90 guests and more, the whole county and half of London, jewels and uniforms in the old ruined house lit up like a great ship at sea. The old woman sat enthroned by the fire receiving her homage. Magnificent in purple, the great starburst pinned at her breast, where it had been pinned 60 years since by a bridegroom with shaking hands. And Eleanor, moving through the crowd about 100 small errands, looked at that brooch upon her mistress's breast and felt the folded letter against her own heart and thought, not yet. Wait for the room. Wait until they are all here. Sherborne came late, and came magnificent, and came, Eleanor saw across the whole width of the ballroom, looking for one thing only. His gray glance went over the 90 guests and the blazing lights, and found her, in her good silk against the far wall, and stopped, and stayed, and every matron who had ever whispered behind a fan turned to see what the grim unbending Duke was looking at. Discovered it was the paid companion, and began at once to whisper. He crossed the room to her. He did not hurry, and did not stop, and did not glance at another soul, and the crowd opened before him, and closed behind him, and buzzed like a struck hive. Miss Whitlock. He bowed. It was the most public thing he had ever done. You are not to hide tonight. My grandmother's orders, and mine. Will you dance? Your Grace, I am at work, Will you dance? He said again, very quietly, so that only she could hear, with me, Eleanor, once, before all of them, so that every person in this room knows exactly where I stand? I have played the coward a whole season. I am done with it. Say yes. And Eleanor, with the whole county watching and her whole careful life in the balance, looked up into the gray eyes that were not cold at all, and opened her mouth to say the reckless yes that would ruin or make her, when Julian Vane's voice rang out across the ballroom, pitched to Carrie, warm and terrible and thick with grief. Stop the music, Vane cried. Stop the music, I beg you. A terrible thing has come to light under this roof, and it cannot wait, and it grieves me more than I can say. The music died in a ragged scrape. 90 faces turned. And into the great ringing silence Julian Vane walked out to the very heart of the blazing floor, with a constable at his shoulder and the worn velvet jewel case in his 2 hands, and he opened it and raised it aloft. And the great starburst blazed in it beneath the chandeliers for all the room to see. "My great-aunt's brooch," he said, his voice breaking beautifully, "the treasure of our line these 100 years, worn at her own breast this very night, gone from her case not 1 hour past, and found, oh, I can scarcely say it, found 10 minutes since by this good constable at the bottom of a trunk." He turned, slowly, so the whole room turned with him, lifted his arm, and pointed, and the finger came to rest upon Eleanor Whitlock in her good gray silk against the far wall. "At the bottom of the trunk of my great-aunt's paid companion. Along with this." He drew from inside his coat a folded letter and read it aloud to the silent blazing room in a voice thick with sorrow. A letter in a woman's hand, boasting to some unnamed confederate that the gray mouse had all but landed the coldest fish in England, that the old woman was a fool and the Duke a greater one, and that once the ring was on her finger, she would strip the house of every jewel in it, and they should both be rich beyond dreaming. "I am sorry," Vane said into the horror of the room, and he did sound sorry. He sounded heartbroken. "I am more sorry than I can say. She fooled us all. She fooled my poor great-aunt, who took her in from charity. She fooled my noble cousin, who, God help him, I fear, had begun to." He let it hang, and looked at Sherborne with brimming eyes. "Constable, do your duty. The theft of diamonds is a hanging matter, or a transporting one at the least. She is to be taken up tonight and tried at the assizes, and this house shall be clean again by morning." The constable stepped forward. 90 faces turned from Vane to the gray woman against the wall, and every one of them had already decided. Of course. What else? The mouse. The charity companion. The penniless parson's daughter with her downcast eyes and her borrowed silk, reaching above herself, thieving, scheming, of course. The story was so easy to believe that it had been believed before Vane finished the telling of it. Eleanor Whitlock stood alone against the wall with 90 faces and a constable, and the whole weight of the county's contempt bearing down upon her. And Sherborne half a step from her side with his hand already moving to shield her, and she did the one thing no one in that room expected. She stepped forward, into the light, herself. "May I see the brooch?" Eleanor said. Her voice was not loud, but it was so perfectly level, so entirely without fear, that it cut through the whispering room like a clear, cold line. And the whispering stopped to hear it. "You have accused me before 90 witnesses, Miss Vane," she went on, walking out onto the blazing floor toward him, unhurried, her hands folded quiet before her. "You have named it a hanging matter. The least you can do is let me hold the thing I am to hang for. Give me the brooch." Vane hesitated. It was the smallest hesitation, a half instant only, but Eleanor saw it, and so did Sherborne, and it was the first crack in the glass. Vane had looked for weeping. He had looked for denial, protest, a woman clinging to the Duke's arm and begging, all the things a guilty mouse would do, all the things that would only sink her the deeper. He had not planned for calm. Calm was not in the story he had written. "There is nothing to be gained," he began. "Give her the brooch, Vane," Sherborne said, and his voice fell across the room colder than any stone. "Or explain to 90 people why you are afraid to." "Afraid? I am not. Then give it to her." Vane gave her the brooch. Eleanor took it in her ungloved hand, turned it once in the blaze of the chandeliers so the whole room saw it flash, then lifted it to her lips and breathed upon it, a long, slow breath, full upon the great central stone, and held it high, at arm's length above her head, so that 90 craning guests might see. A diamond, she said, to the whole room, in her low carrying voice, is the coldest thing in the world that is not ice. It takes your breath and gives it back at once. Watch the great stone in the middle. Watch how long the mist sits upon it. She held it steady. 1, 2, 3, 4. The room watched. 90 guests, and the Duke, and the constable, and the dowager risen up now out of her chair by the fire. All of them watching the fog cling to the great central stone of the starburst, cling and sit and linger, warm and yellow and slow, through a whole shaming count, before at last it grudgingly cleared. A true diamond, Eleanor said, would have cleared before I finished the word 1. This held my breath like a window pane, because it is not a diamond at all. It is glass. It is paste. The great center stone of the Sherborne starburst, the treasure of this house for 4 generations, is a lump of warm French glass, and has been for the better part of a year, and any honest jeweler in England will tell you the same in 10 seconds together. The room made a sound like a held breath let go. But how very convenient, Eleanor went on, turning slowly now to face Vane across the blazing floor. How convenient, Mr. Vane, that a woman planning to strip this house of its diamonds should choose to hide in her trunk a brooch whose greatest stone is worth rather less than my second best pair of stockings. What a poor thief I should make, to steal glass and leave the emeralds untouched, and the pearls, and every true stone still in its case. She let it land. Unless whoever planted this in my trunk did not know that it was paste, unless he did not know it was worthless glass, because the hand that hid it there was not the hand that made it worthless in the first place. This is raving, Vane said. The charm had thinned to nothing. This is a guilty woman throwing sand into the air. Then let us throw a little more of it. Eleanor did not raise her voice. She turned to the dowager, standing straight and unfrail beside the hearth in her purple skirts, her eyes like 2 black stones. Your Grace. In the second drawer of the writing desk in the small parlor, beneath the household books, there lies a green ledger in my own hand. I began it a fortnight since. It is an inventory of every stone in this house, described by its water and its flaw and the day I examined it, and it marks, in my own dated hand, which of them I have found, on cleaning, to be false. Will your Grace send for it? Her mistress looked at her one long moment. Then she jerked her chin at a footman, and the footman ran. And while we wait upon it, Eleanor said, turning back to the room, there is a gentleman sitting in the steward's room who has kept the family's stones for 40 years, and knows every one of them by weight, and who wrote to me a week ago. I carry his letter here, against my heart, where your constable did not think to search, Mr. Vane. That within this last 12-month a gentleman came to him in the Strand and sold him 3 fine old brilliants, cut in an old fashion, under a false name. He can describe the stones. He can describe the gentleman. And he is, he tells me, entirely at the service of any honest inquiry. She looked at the constable. You had best send for him too, I think. The constable, who had come to arrest a gray mouse and was rapidly revising his whole evening, sent for him. They came together, the ledger and the jeweler, into the frozen ballroom, the green book carried by a running footman, and old Mr. Pettigrew shone in blinking from the steward's room in his good black coat, his own great ledger clasped to his chest like a Bible. Now then, said the old jeweler, peering round the blaze of it all. Now then. Miss Whitlock's letter said there was a question of stones. I have brought my book. I never travel without my book. Eleanor took the green ledger, opened it to the marked page, and laid it on a card table a footman had dragged out before them all, and read from it in her clear, even voice, entry by entry, date by date. The Starburst Center Stone. Examined the 3rd of October. Found false. 2 of the 2nd rope of pearls, restrung with lesser stones. An emerald drop, replaced with paste. Each with the date I found it, each in my own hand. Each dated weeks before this night, so that no one may say I wrote it in the last hour to save my neck. Then old Pettigrew opened his own great ledger and set his spectacles on his nose and spoke in the quavering certainty of a man who has spent his life among true stones and false ones. These are the very stones I cleaned 2 years past, he said, whole and true, every one, and I entered them so, by weight, in my book, here and here. And within this last year a gentleman came to me in the Strand, fair, easy, well-dressed, perhaps 30 years of age, giving the name of Mr. Prescott, which I did not believe even then, and sold me 3 old brilliants answering to these very weights and waters. I have the entries here, dated, and I have the stones themselves yet in my safe, unsold. For something in the business never once sat right with me. Could you know the gentleman again? The constable asked. Were you to see him? I could, said Pettigrew, in a room of 1,000. He looked slowly round the blazing ballroom, and the room held its breath, and his old eyes came to rest, without haste and without a shadow of doubt, upon Julian Vane. That is the gentleman. That is my Mr. Prescott. I should know that face at my own deathbed. Julian Vane laughed. It was not a good laugh. It came out too high and cracked in the middle, and he looked round the ring of 90 faces that had, 10 minutes since, been entirely his, and found them all turned now, cold and hard and hungry, upon himself, and he reached, as a gambler reaches when the last card is turned, for the one story he had left. The letter, he said. You all forget the letter. Whatever glass she planted or did not plant, the letter is in her own hand, boasting of the whole scheme, and I read it to you. And a woman's hand does not lie, no, said Sherborne. It does not. He had stood silent a long time at the edge of the light, and had watched the woman he loved take a blazing hostel room apart plank by plank, with nothing but her breath, and a green book, and an old man's memory, and had understood that she did not need him to save her, and had loved her the more unbearably for it. Now he moved. He came forward into the light, and drew from inside his own coat a thick creased sheaf of papers, and laid them upon the card table beside her green ledger. For a year, he said to the room, I have been quietly buying up my cousin's debts, his gaming notes, his tailor's bills, his promises to pay, signed in his own hand, at every table in London, to spare my grandmother the scandal I always knew must come. He spread them with one finger, dozens of them, each signed at the foot. This is my cousin's hand. 90 of you here have seen him write. Come and look upon it. Set it against the letter he says my grandmother's companion wrote. Take all the time you please. I have the whole night, and so, I think, has the constable. They came and looked, the nearest first and then more, crowding the little table. The letter in the woman's hand laid flat beside the sheaf of promises in the man's, and in the end it wanted no jeweler's eye to see it. The letter had been written by a right hand laboring to look like another's, and failing at the small turns, at the loops in the tails, in exactly the places where the signed promises, written fast and careless and unwatched, showed the same hand at its ease. One hand had written both. Disguised in the letter, naked in the notes. It was as plain, once seen, as glass under a breath. Julian Vane was undone by his own paper, and had signed every sheet of it himself. There was no gloating. Eleanor did not gloat, it was not in her, and besides she was of a sudden entirely exhausted, standing there on the open floor with the green book at her hand and the whole terrible tide turned. Sherborne did not gloat either. He looked at his cousin one long, cold moment, then at the constable, and the constable, who now had a very different arrest to make, stepped forward and took Mr. Julian Vane by the arm, and Vane went white, and then gray, and then said nothing at all, for there was nothing at all left to say, and was led out of the blazing ballroom past 90 silent guests into the dark, where the lamps hung among the limes. And then the room was very quiet, and Sherborne turned from the door, and crossed the floor, and stopped before Eleanor Whitlock, and paid at last the thing he had withheld the whole long season. "They have all wondered," he said. He did not lower his voice. He spoke to her, but pitched it for the room, for he had promised himself he was done being a coward, and 90 people were the very audience the promise required. "For a month they have wondered why the coldest man in England calls at his grandmother's house every single day. My grandmother's dearest friends have made a study of it behind their fans. And I let them wonder, because I was a coward, and because the truth was not mine to give away, while this woman stood in my grandmother's pay and could not answer me freely." He looked at Eleanor, and his eyes had not been cold in a long time. "I will give it away now. I never once came for my grandmother." Somewhere in the room the old woman made a sound that in a lesser lady would have been a cackle of pure triumph. "I came," he said, "because a month ago I sat in that drawing room out of duty, cold as I have been my whole life. And a gray woman came in with a tea tray and set it down, and I forgot the sentence I was reading, and I have gone on forgetting sentences ever since. I came because she cuts the roses short, so a man may look across at whoever sits opposite. I came because she took a house I hated and made it the only warm place I own, and learned the name of every servant in it, and never once asked me for a thing. I have passed my whole life among people who say a great deal and have nothing at all behind it. She is the one true thing I have ever found beneath this roof. Everything else, it seems, was paste. She was not." He took her hand. He did it before all of them, deliberately, her ungloved hand in his, and he did not let it go. "I chose you," he said the third evening, "before ever I knew that I had. I chose you every day I drove out on that foul road when I might have been anywhere in England. I have chosen you 100 times over in silence, because I was too proud and too frightened to choose you out loud. So I choose you out loud now, before every soul in this county, that it may never again be a thing whispered behind a fan. I mean to marry you, publicly, lawfully, without one word of apology to any creature who thinks a duke ought to choose a fortune or a face. I have both to spare, and I want neither of them. I want the woman who proved the diamond false and never once raised her voice. Eleanor, will you choose me back?" And Eleanor Whitlock, who had come into that ballroom a paid companion, and been made a thief and unmade a thief again within the space of 1 hour, stood with her hand in his before 90 staring faces, and found that the careful, sensible woman who had told herself for a month that she had imagined everything had, at the last, nothing left to say. So she let the other woman speak, the one who had breathed upon the glass and had not been afraid. "You are meant to choose a fortune," she said, "and a face, and a family that will not set your matrons whispering. I have none of the three. I am a parson's daughter with 12 pounds a year and a sister at school in Bath, and I will not pretend to be sorry for a particle of it." "I have not asked you to be sorry," he said. "I have asked you to choose me." "I know it." Her voice was not quite steady now, for the first time all night. "I know you have." She looked at him, at the gray eyes gone soft, at the granite man made warm, at the whole impossible thing standing before her, holding her hand in a blazing room. "I chose you," Eleanor said, "the evening you told me to laugh more often, and I lay awake half the night furious that I had. I chose you over a candle, when I ought to have been sensible, and was not. I have been choosing you all this while, and calling it imagination, because a woman like me is not permitted to choose a duke, and I was too frightened to say the word aloud." She drew a breath. "I am not frightened now. There does not seem to be anything left to be frightened of. Yes, I choose you. I put my hand into yours, and I choose it freely, and let the whole county whisper as it likes. Let them," he said, "whisper." And he kissed her, there, upon the blazing floor, beneath the washed chandeliers, before 90 guests and a routed constable, and a triumphant old woman by the fire who had planned every step of it and would take the credit to her grave. He kissed the paid companion in her good gray silk, unhurried and unashamed. The granite of England warmed at last clean through to the core. And the room, which had come to gawk at a ruin and stayed to watch a thief hang, broke instead into a sound none there had looked to make that night, which was applause. Over by the fire the old woman dabbed at her perfectly dry eyes with a lace handkerchief, and turned to the astonished matron beside her, the very one who a month since, behind a fan, had named Eleanor a hired mouse. "I do so love a birthday," she said, with enormous satisfaction. "One never knows in the least what one will get. You, your grace? You cannot mean you approve of it? A companion? A nobody?" "I mean," said the Dowager Duchess of Sherborne, "that I have spent 3 years and 1 turned ankle bringing it about, and I will thank you to keep your fan to yourself and let an old woman enjoy her own handiwork. Now hush. They are kissing again. It is the best thing I have arranged in 60 years, and I do not mean to miss a moment of it." They were married before the leaves were fully down, in the small gray church where Eleanor's father had once preached, with her sister brought up from Bath and a new pelisse to be the only bridesmaid, and the old woman in the front pew, not frail at all, weeping quite genuinely this time and denying it fiercely to any soul who dared to notice. "You are crying, your grace," Eleanor murmured to her afterward. "I am doing no such thing. It is the cold in this wretched church. Your father chose a very draughty living. Kiss me, child, and mind my cap." And a year and some months after that, on a soft evening at Fernley Hall, for they had made the Dower House their own, the warmest house in the whole county, and let the great cold ducal seat to a cousin who wanted the consequence they did not, the new duchess sat beside the hearth with the starburst pinned at her breast. It was whole again. Old Pettigrew had brought the 3 true brilliants back from his safe, unsold, and reset them himself with his shaking hands, and would take not 1 penny for the labor. And the great center stone sat once more where it belonged. When Eleanor pressed the back of her hand against it, as she had got into the habit of doing, it was cold. Cold as ice against her warm skin, in the warmest room in the warmest house for 40 miles about. She had learned to love that of it. A true stone kept its own counsel and its own cool. However warmly it was held, so, she had found, did a true man. They had called him the coldest thing in the kingdom, and they had been quite right, and they had understood nothing whatever, for the coldness was only how a true thing keeps itself for the one hand it was ever meant for. You are pressing your hand to that brooch again, Gabriel said, coming in from the dark with the evening's chill upon his coat. And crossing to the fire. And to her. You do it 12 times a day. I have watched you at it. You are always watching me. It is a most inconvenient habit. I can scarcely pour the tea for it. I have tried to break myself of it. I find I cannot manage it. He bent over the back of her chair and looked down into the cradle beside it, where a small, furious person of some 4 months' standing slept with both fists thrown up over its head in an attitude of complete command. The child had its mother's chin and its father's storm-gray eyes. And when those eyes were open, they went over a room precisely as its father's did, cold and level and missing nothing, until they found the one face they wanted, and then they were not cold in the least. He has your look about him, Gabriel said. God help the world when he is grown. He has your eyes, Eleanor said. God help me now. Is that a complaint, Duchess? It is an observation. I have learned to make them, living among clever people who watch too much and say too little. Your son already watches a room the moment he wakes, as though he suspects it of something. He suspects it of everything. It is a sound instinct in a family such as ours. Gabriel looked down at the sleeping child, and something in his hard face went entirely undefended. I will teach him better than I was taught, Eleanor. I will teach him that a man may want a thing out loud and not be destroyed by it. It took me 35 years and a gray woman who cut the roses short to learn as much, and I do not mean my son to wait so long. Then teach him, Eleanor said gently, and I shall teach him the rest. Between us we may raise a creature who is neither so cold as his father was, nor so frightened as his mother. You were never frightened. I was frightened the whole time. That is the difference between us, that your grandmother is always pressing upon me. You wanted nothing and felt safe. I wanted everything and was terrified. She says the second is by far the better way to be cold, since at least there is a fire under it. The dowager had gone up to bed an hour since. She was in her 91st year and had consented at last to admit, on certain evenings, to being just slightly tired, though she denied to her dying day that she had ever once truly napped in that drawing-room, and maintained she had seen the whole business coming from the 3rd evening, and had merely, as any sensible grandmother would, left a shawl or two in useful places. She takes the entire credit, you understand, Gabriel said, drawing a chair close, so the fire lit both their faces gold, and their hands found one another on the arm of her chair, without either quite deciding it. For all of it. The ankle. The reading. The shawls. She informed me last week that I am the stupidest clever man in England, and that without her I should have died a bachelor to spite her, purely from contrariness. She is not entirely wrong. She is not wrong at all. It is insufferable. He turned her hand over in his and looked at it, the ungloved hand that had held a false diamond up to the light before 90 people. I have been thinking of a thing you said to me, that first true evening, that a house is only rooms until somebody lives in it as though they mean to stay. Did I say that? It sounds very wise. I cannot have meant it. You meant it. You are the wisest person I have ever met, and you spend a great deal of your strength pretending otherwise, and I have decided to stop permitting it. He pressed his cold lips to her warm palm. I have been a house of shut-up rooms my whole life, Eleanor, wings closed. Cabinets turned to the wall, selling the silver quietly and praying no one would remark how much was gone. And then a gray woman came in with a tea tray and lived in me as though she meant to stay, and opened the rooms one by one and learned the names of things, and now there is not a dark passage left in me that you have not carried a candle into. I do not know how a man thanks a person for that. I have decided the only way is to spend what is left of my life letting you go on doing it." Eleanor looked at him, her cold duke, warm now clean through to the marrow, saying more words in an evening than the ton had heard from him in a decade, and thought of her father, mending a lady's paste buckle by a poor fire long ago, and teaching a small solemn girl how to know a true thing from a false one. "Paste warms to please any hand that holds it," she said softly, half to him and half to the sleeping child and half to the old man in the small gray church who could not hear her now. "It will glow for anyone, and cloud under any breath, and never once keep its own counsel, for it has none to keep, but a true stone and a true heart. Keep their cool until they are held by the one hand they were always meant for, and then they give back every particle of warmth they were ever given, and more besides." She closed his cold hand inside her two warm ones, as he had once closed his over hers upon a candlestick, and held it fast. "You were never the coldest stone in England, Gabriel. You were only the truest of them. It merely wanted somebody willing to breathe upon you to find it out." And the granite man who had earned that hard cold name across 35 years put his head down upon his wife's shoulder in the firelight and said nothing at all. For once there was nothing whatever that needed saying. And the fire ticked. 1, 2, 3, and the child slept on. And the true stone lay cold and bright against her collarbone in the warmest house for 40 miles about. If you have sat with us this long by the fire, then you have heard how a quiet woman with a candle and a careful eye undid a clever man's whole year of lies in a single hour, and was chosen out loud before the very people who had never once troubled to see her. And I should love to know, before you go, which of it will stay with you? Was it the moment she breathed upon the glass and held it high for the whole room to watch? Or the moment a cold man crossed a blazing floor and said aloud, at last, that he had never once come for his grandmother? Tell me by the fire, in a line or two, which moment you will carry away with you tonight, and if the telling of it has warmed you even a little against the dark, then stay a while and subscribe, and come and sit with us again by the next night's hearth.